Best practices. So over the years, buying, selling, trading, using Bitcoin, I've learned a lot over a decade. But I've also learned from other people, the mistakes they've made, things that I've read, books, articles, new technology. But the industry is constantly maturing, and best practices, which is an actual term, evolves. These best practices evolve. And while it has matured, the industry, the Bitcoin industry, the cryptocurrency industry has evolved and continues to grow, there still are some basic common best practices. So that's what I wanted to share with you right now in this section are these best practices that I did, that I learned about, that I applied, and that I still apply. And so I wanted to at least share that with you. The first section we're going to talk about or the first part of this section is custody or self-custody. And that includes accessing, storing, and auditing your Bitcoin. And even though these are kind of similar, I'm going to break them down, each of them one at a time. Oxford defines custody as the protective care or guardianship of someone or something. And that's what we're talking about here, the custody or self-custody of your Bitcoin. Where are you holding your Bitcoin? Is it in an exchange? Is it in a wallet? Is it in a hardware wallet? Is it in the US, in Switzerland, in China, and Japan? It could be anywhere. Is it on your PC, your Mac, your smartphone? You can have on a paper wallet, I think I may have mentioned. All of these have different pros and cons, and there's different barriers to entry, some of these, okay? But the safest and most secure place that you can store your Bitcoin is probably on a hardware wallet. I still think a paper wallet is really safe as well. And if we take a step back from custody, we can describe all custody options as either being a hot or a cold wallet, okay? A hot wallet is defined as one that's connected to the internet. So if you have your Bitcoin on Coinbase, that would be considered a hot wallet, even though most transactions are done off-chain, which means not on the live network. But if you store your Bitcoin on a Trezor or a Ledger, that's a hardware wallet that's considered cold, okay? Because these devices aren't always connected to the internet. They can, and you can interact with them on the computer and connect those devices, but it's still considered cold storage, like a paper wallet. Now, custody is one of the most important aspects of owning, trading, and using Bitcoin. I've talked about it throughout this entire e-course. And so I've broken it down into three parts: storage, accessing, and auditing. Storage by storing your Bitcoin, accessing by how do you access it and when and how often, and auditing by confirming your quantities. Is your quantity still there of Bitcoin, of altcoins? So as time goes by, you'll see in a second. Storage. So when we talk about storage, I'm referring to the place that you keep your Bitcoin, okay? Now, all the places that you can store your Bitcoin are either a hot or a cold wallet, okay? A hot wallet is one that's connected to the internet, like a smartphone or an exchange. A cold wallet is one that's not connected to the internet, like a hardware wallet such as a Ledger, Trezor, or a paper wallet. You really should be using both types of these. Okay, if you plan to just buy and hold Bitcoin for 5 or plus years, or longer, the safest place that you can store your Bitcoin is on a hardware wallet or paper or both. That's what I did over the last decade. And one thing to remember about this, the more complex your storage options and the passwords that you make, the safer it'll be, but the harder it'll be to access. I've heard horror stories where people have made really, really good passwords, so good that they couldn't get on anymore. It's just, there's some awful, awful stories. I'll tell you about that in a minute, how you should seek out bad news, because it'll reinforce your resolve and you'll learn. But even though paper wallets and even hardware wallets aren't like hard, they're tricky. That's why I offer a service to help people, create these. And they're even doubly and triply as stressful if you're adding and removing coins from them. One of the most stressful things I ever had to do was to scan my paper wallet for Bitcoin that was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars it incited so much panic. It was panic inducing, but it worked. I followed the instructions. It worked. Thank God. But it was very safe. Okay. You could put paper in a fireproof bag, a safe, and then you could hide things somewhere. You have a lot of options. Obviously, you don't want to talk about Bitcoin, so that's one of the things I've talked about before. Now, storing your Bitcoin on an exchange, the custody there, you don't really have self custody. Whereas if you have it on a paper hardware wallet, you have you have the custody. You have your keys. With an exchange, it's easier to use, it's easier to access, it's easier to buy and sell, but it's also a bigger target for criminals. There's bigger risk for something happening to the exchange, it going out of business, theft, you name it, and you don't actually hold those keys, like I said. So what you need to do is find where you feel the most comfortable between most secure and easiest. And somewhere there, either side is going to be a place for your ideal storage option. Okay, next is access. So this is different. And what I mean by access when I'm referring to this is how accessible your Bitcoin is. You might think, well, it's always accessible and I can always access this. Well, not necessarily. So if you set up your Coinbase account and you buy some Bitcoin, what if you don't log back in for 6 months? In some cases, you have to do a new password. You have to kind of re-authenticate in some ways. And if you forgot your password or forgot your email address, which I've worked with people who have, you're in a really difficult situation because you always think it's never going to happen to me. But the fact that this industry is growing so quickly and evolving, Coinbase and other websites and exchanges keep changing their requirements. Some have improved or stricter minimum security requirements. I've seen that. Some have increasing limit requirements, you name it. Binance and Livecoin, where I used to have a lot of my crypto, eventually had a lot of pressure and they had to kick off any US residents. You can still get on by using a VPN, just saying. I didn't, I got off. But that was stressful and it's gonna happen. It happens with other exchanges and other even apps as well on the phone. Some have even shut down overnight. So what's the advice? What am I getting at when it comes to access? The advice is to keep manual track of the custody of your Bitcoin. If you do just a little bit of work over a long period of time, then you'll be much better off, okay? So what that means is signing on to these exchanges where you have other cryptocurrencies, accessing it, comparing the amounts to what you originally bought it for. So keeping like an Excel spreadsheet, that's what I did. And I'm really grateful I did because it helped me sleep better at night. In some cases, I didn't log on often. And why that's a problem is for reporting, was for tax purposes, is knowing what the transaction history was. Sometimes if it's been longer than a couple years, you can't get your transaction history anymore. Did you know that? That's a concern. So you're going to want to download your transaction histories. So when it comes to accessing and you have your Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies on these other exchanges, you want to have that information, as much information as you can. Open a folder, drop those files in there, date it, do a little bit of organizing, a little bit of digital organizing. It'll really, really help you when it comes to the future, this part of access, okay? No one's going to be setting you, or no one's going to be, reminding you or tapping you on the shoulder like a financial advisor saying, hey, did you log into that site? Have you checked your app? Have you looked at this? It's on you. Now, this may not apply to you or really affect you if you're just on Coinbase or if you just use a certain app, and that's fine. This is just kind of more for those who want to experiment and try and take a leap of faith and risk on some of these other new technologies, because some of them are really incredible. Again, this is a moving target. This is a very evolving space. It's exciting. It's like science fiction. Auditing. So I talked about this just a little bit, but this is similar to storing and accessing, but it's more of a focus on the individual amounts of your holdings and how they change over time. So, and especially if you're getting interest or you're staking them, which I'm not going to go into right now. Again, if you're only into Bitcoin and you're just storing it on Coinbase, and this doesn't really apply to you, so you can even skip ahead if you want. But if you experiment with other exchanges, other cryptocurrencies and you do trading, then this is really important, this little bit of advice. For starters, you want to write down what exchanges you're using, okay? Whether you write it physically down on paper or put it into a file. What their usernames and passwords are, and get your trade history. I just mentioned that in the accessing part. So that trade history needs to include the date you bought or sold the cryptocurrency, the date and time, and how much, okay? So that's very important because for tax purposes, when you bought and sold something and how much its value was is what the IRS needs to see. So that's very important, that timestamp of when you bought and sold something and the value for it. And another important reason to do this is because some transaction histories on these exchanges only go back a year or two and then no more. I've been on some of these exchanges for longer than 5 years, and then I try to go back and you can't. They won't let you. And some customer service, I'll just say, is better than others. But look over your audit, what you take down and see on the different exchanges, and check them as you log in, and avoid timeouts or having to change your password, which is another reason why you want to make access so easy and do some due diligence and sign on. Okay, because you'll be issued new coins and tokens sometimes for free. You might want to learn about those. You might have an opportunity on Coinbase. If you've told other people about it, you get some money back or some coins back, some Bitcoin. If you watch an ad or watch a little learning kind of a game on Coinbase, you can get some free currencies. Okay, the second one is do not talk about Bitcoin. This really only applies if you've invested a substantial amount of money in Bitcoin, or if you bought several years ago or bought now and you're watching this 10 years in the future, 2031, and Bitcoin's now worth 10 or 50 million, who knows? It could be. If you're right now, you're still considered an early adopter. Okay, even when I bought before, I was considered an early adopter. We're still in that stage because it's not that widespread. But if you buy any amount of this and it appreciates in value a lot, and you've been talking about it a lot, people remember. You kind of put more of a target on your back. When I first bought Bitcoin, I talked to people about Bitcoin, but I never told never told people how many Bitcoin I had. You can ask my friends or family. I never, ever talked about it. The only reason I'm talking openly about it here is because I had to sell it all. Okay, I paid for our house and other things and debt and whatnot and taxes. But if I still had those 50, I probably wouldn't be doing this video. I probably wouldn't be talking about that I had at one point that many. And so you're going to want to really be conservative with the things you say and who you say things to, okay? Because Bitcoin, I believe, still is going to be worth a ton of money one day. I think a lot more than just $30,000 or $60,000, which is kind of where it went in the last couple months of this year in 2021. But I've also heard horror stories, really stupid things people have done, brag about how many Bitcoin they have, brag about a great trade that they're making. And I'll just say this. There have been cases where people have been beaten up, threatened, their lives have been threatened, their kids, their wives, their spouses, because people found out and they were bragging about what they had. Again, you're probably like, well, this is common sense. You don't need to tell me this. I'm just going to say it because it needs to be said. It was a concern I had, or at least something I had in the back of my mind, and I think it's something that you need to think about too. Because this is very valuable stuff. This is like finding gold. Bitcoin is like better than gold. Okay, next is splits and airdrops. Okay, you might be like, what's a split? What's an airdrop? Or maybe you already know what these are. So this is where we talk about that. First, splits. So early on in Bitcoin's life, there were more than a few disagreements, and there still are, about the way Bitcoin should go, how it should be run in the future. And probably the biggest one still to this day that caused a literal splitting apart of Bitcoin, where half the space went one way and half the space went the other way, was with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Okay, that argument surrounded how to solve one of Bitcoin's biggest challenges, and still is, scalability. So every 10 minutes, the network will gather all the transactions from that period of 10 minutes. And the problem is, and still is more transactions are filling up those blocks. So that means it's more information on the internet, which can tend to slow things down. So how do you speed up a network or keep it really fast if more people are using it? Clogs the network. You could pay a higher fee to make your transaction go faster, but that really isn't a sustainable model. So back when this split happened with the big schism of 2017, hard fork, which is what it was, the split, one group decided to increase the size of the blocks to include more transactions, while the other group kept Bitcoin almost exactly the same as it was created, but made it so that the blocks required less data to fill them, but still would include the necessary transaction information. And that group split off. So Bitcoin Cash was led by Roger Ver. But what happened during the split was that the miners, and this is what will still happen in the future, miners are left to decide which path and fork in the road to take, which update to make. It's by consensus. It's how Satoshi made it. The original Bitcoin won out. Bitcoin Cash split off. Splits are important, and the reason I'm talking about best practices for this is if you invest in any other coins, you want to be aware of the different coins that could split off of it, because there's different development with the developers in each of these coins, not just Bitcoin, where they split. Bitcoin Cash even split off into multiple coins itself. And so that happens. I've gotten coins multiple times from altcoins that I've invested in, Bitcoin I've invested in, because of splits. So you essentially get free coins out of this. It's pretty awesome. Now, not all of them do this, but some of them do. So the lesson is you want to pay attention to the development of each of the coins in which you invest. These splits happen a lot with other coins. Airdrops. Airdrops is like what you are thinking when I say airdrops, money falling from the sky or a free gift from the sky. They are free distributions of coins from the owner or the creator of the coin, the founder, to incentivize you to use the coin or look at it, or, hey, get attention. I'm a shiny object over here. Look at my coin. I'm going to give you something. And it's nice. It's great to get free stuff. Most of the coins, in my opinion, are crap. They're worthless. They don't really solve a real problem, or they're scams. But, in some ways, this really helps you pay attention to something that could have merit. I considered the early Bitcoin faucets kind of like an airdrop, although it really wasn't, But benevolent people who wanted to have some Bitcoin to share with others did airdrops through this way. They had Bitcoin where if you went to a site and you put in your address, you would get Bitcoin sent back to you. So the airdrops are nice because they encourage users to use the coins, or at least take a good look at them, a good hard look. And it's usually coming from the coin or the company's marketing budget as an attempt to sell more of the coin or make you buy more of the coin. But it's something to keep in mind, something to pay attention to, because these things happen, they come up, and there's so many different coins. So if you do, you have an opportunity here to look into other coins and maybe get some through an airdrop. Okay, next bit of advice is seek out bad news. And you're probably like, why? Okay, so one of the best things you can possibly do is be as aware and as informed about what's going on with Bitcoin or any other coin you invest in. This is something you're going to want to continually do, especially if you've invested a substantial amount, or really any amount, but amount you really don't want to lose. This is something that I did early on, at 13, 14, 15, all the way up to 17 and 18 and on, and I still do to some extent, as I try to find the worst news about Bitcoin. What are the biggest, most sensational arguments against Bitcoin? And then I think about them. I think, does this make sense? Is this just BS? Is this legit? And in a lot of cases, it really wasn't anything special, and I could just rule it out. But in some cases, I kind of panicked. I was like, oh crap, how does Bitcoin solve that? Well, what does Bitcoin do? Is that real news? And if you have invested in Bitcoin, you'll know what I mean. Some of you are probably already doing this. You're looking at all the news on your Twitter feed or wherever, Facebook or the news, however you get your news, and you're watching everything, you're seeing everything. Of course, that can go to an extreme, and you can kind of obsess. I talked about that before in my Bitcoin story, but it is important to do, and I think especially finding bad news. And this is pretty easy to do because in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of bad news. It seems like it's pretty easy to find bad news with Bitcoin because it's such a big target now. But to this date, I've never found a silver bullet to steer me away from Bitcoin or sticking with it. Another bit of advice is I wouldn't recommend using Bitcoin to buy and sell goods right now because of the tax guidance. They treat it like property, and if you want to buy coffee, you have to realize a gain or a loss on it. It's onerous, and I understand why they do it, but frankly, if you're not prepared to do that, then don't buy it. Don't use Bitcoin to buy and sell goods. I use it to trade, buy it low, sell it high, and make money and pay taxes on that. But in our country, that in the United States, that is not how the tax guidance is. And maybe it will be, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I mean, I don't see them letting it directly compete with the dollar, because if people realize how good Bitcoin is, or how much better it is, people aren't going to use the dollar, and that would cause problems. Let's just say that. Now, there are other countries where you can do this. El Salvador, let's just bring up the obvious one. They just made Bitcoin legal tender. It's a huge thing. So maybe when you travel, you can do that. And some places, I think in, not Puerto Rico, but there are some places where you could go to live and they don't have the same capital gains and tax laws. So that's something to consider as well. You have to live in these spaces. There's obviously conditions, but that's just something I don't do. I don't buy and sell goods using Bitcoin right now. But okay, I didn't want to talk too much in the best practices, but I hope this was helpful for you. And I'm going to wrap up in just a minute, but I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you enjoyed this.